All right, welcome to the RaaP. Gotsman, good to see you. Adrian, happy to have you joining us. Little bit different episode today. We're gonna really focus on and go deep on a certain vertical and our cyber practice, which is an area of our business that's just been massively growing over the last couple of years. An area we've made a lot of progress in, and excited to talk about it in this format. So, before we dive in, KG, how you doing today, man?
Good, good. Not too bad. It's a little warm this week, but I think everybody's feeling that. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And Adrian, happy to have you on here. I believe we've had you on as a guest before. I think maybe we did a deep dive on SASE or SD-WAN or maybe MDR. These are all things that you're living in day to day, and so excited to have you with us today. For any listeners that aren't familiar with you, maybe hit your background just a little bit. Who are you? To Resourcive, and what are you bringing to the table here?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. I know we have had a couple of different cyber nerdy episodes, so that is exactly where I sit at Resourcive as the cyber practice lead. Is all of the nerdy cybersecurity things, and specifically trying to bridge business and cyber, and kind of bring in the cyber conversation into a lot of our clients and what they do in IT instead of just viewing it as an individual silo. I sit in a subject matter expertise role, not necessarily a day-to-day consultant type thing, but when we need cyber stuff, me or my team pop on and try to align business efforts with cybersecurity. I come to the job with a little bit of background in as a Green Beret, just like some of the other people here at Resourcive and veterans, getting used to doing more with less, which translates really well to a lot of our clients, especially in cyber, where they may not have large cyber teams. Yeah. And I come from a background of software development for offensive security tools in the government and the cleared space. And I have a computer science degree and some consulting background sprinkled in there, and all the different things that I did on like when you met me, Kyle, and I was trying to adventure around the world and live on a sailboat and things like that. So
yeah.
Happy
Yeah,
to be here.
we've tamed you a little bit. I feel like here you are in a real building, not under sail, and see you there more days than out on the ocean
It's
now.
wild
So
to have reliable internet, I'll tell you. Like that's pretty nice, right?
yeah, exactly. Well, part of what we're going to be talking about today specifically is what we're seeing in the manufacturing space. This is a vertical where you and our cyber practice specifically has been having a lot of success, like making a lot of difference for clients. Really coming in and able to improve a lot, and it's something where, it whether it's market dynamics, macroeconomics, the threat environment. I'm not exactly sure what combination it is, but this is a big focus area for a lot of manufacturing companies right now, really looking at their cybersecurity posture. And so, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of why that's uniquely difficult, what challenges they're specifically dealing with, and what you and your team are doing in that space. So that's really the goal of today, and should be a good conversation. So I guess let's dive into it.
Sounds good.
Excellent. So, maybe we start with, a lot of where we're focused in this specific practice, at least, is really in mid-market companies, right? They've got some size, they've got some scale, they have some awareness that they need to do something, right? They're large enough to actually, be a legitimate target, and they know what to do, but they're not able to take a lot of actions. And so, based on what you're seeing, like what's kind of what's leading to that, right? Before we dive into anything about what we're doing, want to really understand the environment. So maybe you could tee that up on some of what you're seeing with these companies you're going into.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how immature a lot of manufacturing companies are in both their IT and their cyber postures. And I think that's just like a legacy of how a lot of PE firms now are doing roll-ups or are trying to find similar companies that are in very similar verticals like packaging or food and beverage or like HVAC or any of the different types of things across the country. And a lot of companies were able to build a business that was really strong in their local area. But as they get rolled into a larger organization, their cyber and IT maturity is really not up to par about what investors are expecting to protect that revenue. And a cyber incident, at a smaller company may not have that much of an effect because a lot of their processes are manual and they have a lot of old historic on-prem systems. But as they start hooking things in to larger organizations migrating to M365 or cloud resources, they start exposing a lot of those old historic systems to all of the rest of the world and the new threats that are out there. And at the end of the day, like what a lot of people are starting to realize is that cyber complexity and IT complexity is actually a business problem that affects their revenue and their ability to scale, period. And when they start realizing that, they're suddenly in this spot where they have multiple tenants or multiple sites that are all hooked together but are managed by multiple MSPs. And there's really no consistency across the environment. And that just opens up like the realistic threats, which is like miscommunication or misconfigurations, the email phishing, right? Like will have a much larger effect to have like financial fraud when you're dealing with millions of dollars of payments to suppliers instead of tens of thousands, right? Like insurance is a wildly different conversation. And, a lot of these organizations are already low margin based off the economic times, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so they can't afford to invest significant amounts to solve those problems because, frankly, like everybody in the cyberspace is trying to sell you a new tool that does the new thing. But you can't afford to misstep and purchase something that isn't going to have the best bang for the buck. And so at the end of the day, you're combining legacy stuff with modern technology and the expectations of investors to scale and continue to add new plants. And it's just resulting in chaos, both in IT and in the OT environments that like, oh, that's right. That's also a complex thing that we have to deal with. And now we have 8 plants, 10 plants that all have separate vendor contracts with maintenance and who's allowed access to the environment. And that's just, the obvious stuff.
Is there like a moment, because it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way you're describing it is like you're in this kind of pre-moment where you're too small or you don't have that level of investment, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and now you're big enough for it to matter and have that level of complexity. Obviously I think businesses don't want to be caught on their heels. So is there a trigger? Is there a moment? Is there an early warning that says like, hey, before we get into that, oh no situation, and start scrambling? Like, how do you grow or scale into that?
Great question. Because I have seen that there are really the common point where they realize it, but then there's the precursors that are starting to indicate the problem. I'll start with when they realize it, because that's usually when we get contacted. But that's when their previous services from MSPs are just not cutting it anymore. And I'm not saying that to indicate that these MSPs are bad. It's just that when you have lots of people, the service starts reducing. And by lots of people, I mean many MSPs. The gaps and the seams between services, between plants, really, really starts affecting things. And you may actually have plant downtime because you are unable to access file shares or ERPs, or you can't access different things from billing and supplier stuff because it used to be, niched down to an individual like accounts payable team at each individual plant. But now all of the people have been rolled up into a single accounts payable section. Well, all that stuff's in 4 or 5 different ERPs that are being managed on-prem. At some point, there is this realization that our IT environment is too complex for us, our business, to continue to do revenue generation the way that it had previously, and we have to figure out how to make it more efficient. And that's the driver, right? Is like,
Yeah.
we have to figure out how to continue to scale revenue while also trying to tackle these operational inefficiencies that exist in our business processes. Because that's all IT and cyber is doing is IT is like enabling those business processes to be more efficient, and cyber is just protecting those processes from outside influence or threats and affecting that revenue generation as well. I will say that if there are any triggers that are the best indicators in advance of that, it's when you start doing acquisition of multiple plants, or really when you exceed 3 to 5 locations, or 3 to 5, we'll say 3 manufacturing locations and up to like 5 other locations, because maybe you have storage or like a headquarters or something like that. And that's because when you get that amount, you will start seeing the indicators of those trouble things, those tickets not getting answered on a timely manner. Maybe the service offerings themselves no longer meet the compliance requirements and reporting requirements to the FDA, to any of your suppliers. Maybe you're scaling because you are having customers ask you for cybersecurity questionnaires that traditionally an MSP would fill out, but like now you don't know if each individual MSP is consistently applying the same technology or controls, and you're actually kind of assuming a little bit of legal liability. And when you start identifying those things as like, oh, that should be like an indicator in the back of your mind that maybe we should start figuring out how to scale this a little better. Because when you go to that point that it's like really hard and you're really actually affecting revenue, unfortunately, it's actually affecting revenue. So it's going to just continue to be difficult.
It's redlined at that point, right? Like you're trying to shift gear at the right moment on the RPMs, because you can't do it too early, because you don't
Great
have
example.
you don't have the momentum or the justification for it. But if you're waiting too late, the engine's getting real hot, and you're risking something breaking down in that moment before you shift to the appropriate gear in that scale. So,
and if you're a supplier, right, like supply chain attacks and larger enterprises that are your customers as a manufacturing organization, whatever those are, you fit into their supply chain, and they are now providing, or not providing, they're requiring an additional level of diligence for all their suppliers, because they recognize that their supply chain is a complex system. And if you have a cyber attack or an IT incident that results in downtime, you are now affecting their much larger revenue projections. And that is unacceptable to them. And so what's funny is that while we're having these conversations and discussing with people, they will, after 3 or 4 months, and we're talking about, we can move these things, but we recommend you take this a little more seriously. Then they have a customer come back and say, oh, we have this cyber questionnaire or some other type of thing in supply chain due diligence, and you're not kidding, we actually need to have some of these things in place, or we're not going to be able to win this contract or continue this contract. And unfortunately, you can only do so much in 30 days. And it doesn't have to be expensive up front, right? That's what I'm kind of get to, is it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be a new tool. Just build the processes in place and talk about that stuff.
It's probably a good transition, because something we've been really intentional about with kind of the build out of our program and kind of our service offering in this space is it's not about just buying more tools, right? I think that's one of the biggest things we see out there is it's not necessarily a shortage of tools, right? Occasionally somebody needs something else, but that's not kind of the issue. So maybe talk a little bit about what those engagements have looked like, in kind of the early weeks, early months on getting started, right? How do we actually begin when we go and we engage and we are working with companies to mature their cyber program?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are many different approaches, and everyone likes to try to bucket into certain, we'll do all the assessments for you and we'll build your overall, all of the things, or else we don't want to work with you. Or it's, some other project-based stuff. We have tried to focus on identifying the biggest risks that an organization's facing, and in a way that's not I'm not saying it's like a salesy thing. That's we will have conversations that are fairly in-depth about how they generate revenue and how they are using their existing IT infrastructure and assets, and really what the whole landscape looks like for those intricacies of whatever that system looks like. Because then that is the critical stuff that cannot fail or will affect revenue. And then we'll take a look at, hey, all right, here's some baseline cybersecurity controls. Do we meet all of those? Great. Here's some next level stuff. And now we can start getting into frameworks of like NIST CSF or SIS 18, but it's more focused on where someone is right now and how to mitigate the threats to their business. So, like a lot of the time, that is not buying a new tool. That is not buying a new service. That is not buying a new, even swapping out your managed service provider. It can just be taking a good look at what your contractual requirements for your MSP is. Maybe you want to upsize their services, or you need to build internal processes. So to like circle back to the actual question, right? Like what does it look like? It's a lot of holistic interviews up front and conversations, and dipping our toe into technical validation of those controls that are really important to make sure that an MSP is actually saying, you know, all of our systems do have MFA, requirement for your cyber insurance, all kinds of reasons to do that. Well, if someone from the business is not validating that, you can end up in a situation like one of our clients where it turns out that they had it set up previously. Microsoft has changed how they do MFA enforcement, and now half of the new accounts are not actually MFA enforced. That is a big deal because that is a like foundational technology. I don't think any PE or like operating partner or investor would be very excited to hear about that when you're like, what do you mean? This is, we've been doing diligence on you guys for 6 months, and now all of a sudden you don't have these foundational controls.
Yeah, but it's the technical validation that was key, right? Because I mean, they will say yes, and it's not necessarily bad intent, right? It's just this is our policy. We have MFA enabled. The answer is
100%.
yes. But then you dive into the technical pieces, especially when you're in this outsourced sort of thing. You're utilizing an MSP for it. Like they may not have great visibility over everything that's in there, and there can really just be, you consider them, maybe oversights, right? It's not actually poor intention, but it doesn't. My wife says something to me occasionally, and it's intention doesn't equate to impact, right? And so it's like it's not necessarily bad intention, but the impact can be quite negative. And so that technical validation piece is very important.
Absolutely. And a lot of this is focused on meeting these organizations where they are and where they can afford to invest. But a lot of the time, I'll just like start naming situations, right? I mean, never really had a director of IT, much less a security team. And now we're hiring somebody, and that person is onboarding, realizing, I mean, they probably came from a different enterprise and are understanding of what is supposed to look, what things are supposed to look like in an IT environment. And they're realizing the deficiencies. And so they're like, I just need someone that is smart and helpful in the technology space to be an extension of my team so that I can validate the controls and actually help get things implemented. Well, that's like a perfect example of how we've been helping. The other side is like we have multiple MSPs, and the CFO or COO are managing those relationships. And there is no technical validation even for those cyber insurance claims or cyber insurance kind of questionnaires. Or the due diligence questionnaires from your customers or things like that. And then when you do that technical validation, you discover it, like you said, it's not malicious intent. It's just, you just have risk. You have exposure that you didn't know you had before. So we will just help at least let you sleep at night. We'll validate that those things actually exist or that they don't and help you remediate those, because again, that doesn't even have to be a tool purchase. It's just implementing Microsoft's conditional access best practices or something, right? Like that's, Microsoft tells you how to do it. We're happy to help just send you the link and your MSP can implement it.
That's a super important distinction, right? Because if you come in, there's providers, suppliers, vendors, whatever category you want to put them into in the market, where when they come and look at that, their solution is going to be sell you another tool to accomplish that, right? Whereas we're taking this perspective that says, hey, is there a path that's more efficient, can happen quicker, can be less expensive, and the nature of not having built some cyber tool, right? Whereas we're working to mature a program holistically versus jam a tool into a specific place. where maybe that's not in the best interest of the client. And so I think that's a big kind of distinction around our offering and what we're going to market with here. And we see it time and time again in clients.
Yeah, and one of the key aspects of what we've kind of invested in is on a GRC platform for governance, is using a governance, risk, and compliance platform that is not focused on complex cybersecurity frameworks. It has that in there, and we will do a crosswalk across those. But most of our clients, that's not helpful. Like they are at a point where they just need to implement consistent controls for whatever is in their environment, and they will be way safer. Then next year you can start implementing that additional stuff and maturing. But using that GRC tool, we do a little bit of project management and planning and forecasting and develop an actual practical roadmap of you should do these things. You can even hand that roadmap off to your MSP to execute. And we provide executive access to that platform to let executive reporting, maturity, you see the line kind of going up as things change. You can assign individual tasks to the MSP, and then we can validate the actual implementation and correct configuration of things with even just uploading a snapshot. And so that's been really, really helpful in communicating to CFOs or COOs what their true risk is and how the roadmap is actually achievable, rather than aligning that to a product or a tool. Like, no, 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 no. This is how your organization should be internally. We should help you build risk processes and things like that and have that conversation, because tell you what, CFOs know how to talk risk. And when you put it in that kind of language, it's a lot more understandable.
I guess kind of double clicking, I think, one of the words that you've said multiple times is helpful, right? Which implies a level of helping, to put it bluntly, where, I think that, look, I mean, the stigma or stereotype around traditional consulting is, I've got a busted pipe in my basement. I call a consultant, they come down and they say, hey man, you've got a busted pipe in your basement. You should probably get that fixed. I'm like, that's not helpful, right? Like, I know I have a busted pipe. That's why I called you in. Like, I, at some point, just need people that come in and help. So, I guess, how would you say that the program that, that we're building at Resourcive is different, and specifically, that kind of helpful aspect?
Yeah, I'll just continue your analogy, right? So like, plumber goes downstairs to your basement and finds a huge leak. I'm probably going to walk in and just put my finger on the leak and try to stop it and minimize it and be like, okay, I think we know what the cause is here.
Yep.
Let's focus on this real quick, but let's also make sure we take a look around the rest of the environment and make sure that there aren't other things that are going to affect your home and cause additional, like maybe the ladder fell and that's what did it, right? But like, what caused that thing? And so it's like, what is the actual help and benefit? We're pricing everything by, because everyone wants to know cost, right? We at Resourcive price things and try to do T&M based stuff, and some companies don't like that, but we do it that way because we traditionally come in under the estimate and cost, and so we work really hard to do that because we believe that the most value that we're providing in excess of that stuff is really you're getting access to multiple resources, and then we are finding the resource that you need at that moment. Maybe it's strategy, maybe it's network engineering, maybe it's something else, right? It's just project management, just helping you execute and track the things, and you're only paying for that time of that person, that resource. And so we have an enterprise level cybersecurity team with fantastic experience, former CISO, right? Like giving you strategy advice from a VC scaled backed company, right? Like he has seen a lot of different things through his defensive consulting time. And that's your strategy advisor. But when you want to talk tool selections, and because tools are a part of it, how do we figure out like the best tool for your environment? Well, let's try to figure out a market analysis across the board and figure out what the best mix of capability and cost is, and then get the right thing in place. And so like at the end of the day, the value we're trying to provide is access to enterprise grade experience and really in-depth knowledge for a fraction of the cost of hiring somebody, or even going to traditional consulting organizations that are going to price everything out at a $30,000 to $50,000 assessment. Like, no, no, no. Maybe we don't need to do a fresh assessment. Maybe we can take your diligence reports, your last cybersecurity assessment from 3 months ago. Let's take a look and help you build the roadmap longer term based off of that. And then, spot check, do some diligence of our own to make sure that, that was all encompassing.
So I guess if you could define some of the left and rights, I mean, obviously there's a wide market, different industry, different vertical, size companies. Who is this offering for, and maybe even not for, right? Like, what's your ideal profile of somebody that says, like, if all of a sudden you were to give a characteristic and I'm like, hey, that's me, and I can raise my hand. What does that look like?
I'd say the people that are most positioned for the value are those that are probably $100 million plus and scaling, and you are going through either M&A or you're building your own plants, but you are scaling your operations, and you are starting to realize that there are inherent weaknesses in your existing environment. And if you're growing through M&A, solid, you're going to hit it sooner or later kind of conversation. But also lean teams. Like, manufacturing organizations don't have traditionally a large amount of margin, and so they need to be really efficient with their resources. And so those that have that, even an IT executive or even one cyber person that's dual hatting with different things, small team, even an MSP that is managed by a COO or CFO, but that doesn't have like a really robust access to cyber or IT type people. That's where a lot of the value really, really comes in, because you are likely not going to be able to hire those people at the level that you would want. Whereas our offering is just so efficient and like capital efficient that it really is kind of a no-brainer for once we start providing value for our clients, they are kind of amazed and they're like hooked, right? Like, you guys are absolutely helping us build this program and scale our business.
What does some of that look like in practice? I mean, we've got a couple recent engagements, right? So maybe just kind of some real world examples of what some of those engagements have actually looked like, and some of the stuff that you and your team have worked on.
Yeah. So one client has we started with a security assessment because we looked at their due diligence reports and identified some, we'll say, gaps in the roadmaps that some of those organizations had said, mainly focus on IT for 2 years and then start worrying about security on the backside. Not a great way to do it. And so really the advice there was, hey, we can do an in-depth assessment. We can also do like a, wave top assessment, take in your diligence report, and then do interviews with plant managers, an hour for each plant manager per MSP. And then just kind of, we used it as like a security discovery. What are the actual systems that each of these MSPs are managing? And are there any risks that are inherent in that, and any gaps between, like, oh, maybe plant one's doing something, plant two's not. And there were some really fun gaps. And then from there, we got engaged to do more of a program management. And so we are providing strategic and operational / tactical assistance for their director of information technology and their MSPs to help them make sure that they are implementing cybersecurity stuff properly, policy, incident response policies and procedures, just like helping them build those risk management processes. And it's like a really small cost per month, but they just get a couple of people from our team pretty much on call. We join meetings, we help them guide strategy, we do syncs and things like that. Another client is, a director of technology is being promoted from within, from a former plant management smaller organization as they roll up. And we're just helping him get an understanding on his environment and where he can really help shape how he goes about his investigation and identify the most effective route to wrangle all of the information technology stuff, because asset inventory is incredibly important in cybersecurity. And so we'll help him build that. And then if we walk away from that, 3 months from now, and he's happy and says, hey, got it, then high five, we've provided value. Some of the other ones we've done are like straight sourcing, or are our EDR tools configured properly? Do we have the right spend in cybersecurity? Do we have the right technology in place? Are there cheaper, easier ways to do this? Do we have the right processes? I hate to say it, we also do get called in post breach, not for incident response retainer type stuff, because the cyber insurance is usually building all of that, and a lot of our clients in PE are usually wrapped up in those policies with other people. But how do they rebuild the network and implement the needed technology and processes now that they actually have had that cyber incident and realize how important it is? How do you get from there to operations in a capital efficient way, right? Like, cyber insurance paid for all of the DFIR investigations, but now we actually have to get back to plants running. Like, you can't get downtime back. So how do we do that?
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that feels like we see over and over is, you ask somebody about a roadmap and it's like, okay, well, we're going to implement this tool, and then we're going to implement this tool, and then we're going to implement this tool. And, that seems like this kind of common misconception or myth that, like, you're maturing the program by layering on more tools. Talk to me a little bit about that, because we see it over and over, and sometimes it's kind of a context we have to reset to the benefit of the business, right? Because, like, you actually can have a more secure environment, more capital efficient, less tools to manage. But it does seem counter to some people's thinking in this space.
Yes, and I will blame the cybersecurity marketing that goes into, hey, this tool does all of these things. I mean, it might, but it also requires a lot of care and feeding by your team. And so if you get back to basics, an incident response process does not actually require many tools if you have the processes and information ready to go. There are open source tools you could use to meet some of those requirements. There are processes to help you respond, and you just have to rehearse them. That's it. That's really all that fancy XDR platform is doing, is it's providing the ability to get better decision making. Well, if you prep for it, you can put those processes and procedures in place for only the time. I'm not going to say no cost, right? Because internal people time and bandwidth absolutely costs money. But that is a much more capital efficient way to do that, because once it's built, your team is trained, as opposed to having a consultant come in that is focused on, hey, we're going to do all these things for you in isolation, rather than helping you work with the business to develop those internally. And that's like a different approach.
Makes a lot of sense. Just kind of starting to wrap up here a little bit. What would you say to, a CFO or an IT lead that's feeling overwhelmed when it comes to their cyber program?
I would say you're not alone. And if you reach out to your peers, you're probably going to get 10 different answers. Like 10 peers, 10 answers. And I would say the actual practical advice that's more helpful is do some of the investigation on your own. That's really easy for you. Like, take a look at what your service levels are for your MSP, because if you're not doing cyber things because you believe your MSP is taking care of it, look at your contract and actually see what they are providing. Because a lot of MSPs that are providing services for manufacturing companies are at bare bones level when that contract started, 5 years ago. And now they're either off contract, they're month to month, or there is a very limited scope on what they're providing, and they may not be doing the things that you expect, even if it's a good relationship. I don't mean that in that the MSP is taking advantage. I just mean, like, you have reached a point where you need to protect your business. And cyber is difficult, but mostly because it comes with a different set of terms and language. There are capital efficient ways to protect your business that are less disruptive to your business processes, right? But you may need to change how you do things. If you're willing to make the changes, there are less disruptive ways to do that, and we're happy to help you walk through those. Like, even just using your internal tools, switching from file shares to SharePoint for your financial data and proprietary data, just for role-based access control. Like, that's a great way to approach some of those things. But at the end, I would say it doesn't have to be expensive, but you do actually have to do something. You can't just let it sit.
So, and I love my analogies, as you may have picked up on, right? It sounds like, because to Kyle's point earlier, I think, a lot of times we get caught in this, okay, so what's the fix? Like, what's the thing that I'm going to go plug and make a fix, right? And it sounds like for cybersecurity, this is more of a program than it is a product or service specifically. And I think about that in the context of like physical fitness. It's not what weight or Bowflex do I need to buy that's going to change my life, and it's not a specific workout or a specific diet, but it's actually a program that may include, right? It's not that there's not that it's no tools are needed for this, or that there's no actions that are needed. It's that, well, you need to step back and take more of a program, a holistic view, and then use the right tools, get the right weights that you need, the right diet, the right workout schedule to create an actual ongoing form of maturity into this physical fitness, but cybersecurity fitness. Is that an accurate reflection of
100%. And I'll even kind of extend your analogy to something else, right? Like I'll put it back in like the CFO world, because I have some like CFOs that I've been talking to recently, and like you can absolutely do all of your financial analysis in Excel. You could, 100%. But how much effort are you going to put into it? And how much expertise on your side will be needed to maintain it and continue to scale it? Because you absolutely can do everything with Excel. But at some point, there is a trade-off that it becomes more capital efficient in time, resources, energy, your mental health, right? Your poor computer's processor. In offloading that into specialty tools or bookkeeping software or things like that. And so you would never approach a financial problem the same way that like, oh, well, we're already paying X dollars. Why do we need to change it? Well, it's because your business is changing. And it is a program that continually needs care and feeding and maintenance. That doesn't mean that it has to be millions of dollars, right? You just need to mature things as your business changes, just like all other things. What worked yesterday, it might work tomorrow, but it's definitely not going to work next year. So at what point will it stop working? Unknown.
Yeah, I think the framing as programmatic is ideal. Obviously, that's why we've developed it that way. But I mean, it is something that it takes. I think the care and feeding is a great way to tee it up. So, I mean, Adrian, appreciate you joining Kyle and I today and really doing an overview and a rundown of this. Something we'll probably have more conversations on. I mean, it's very topical right now. Some of the pieces we didn't even dive deep on. I mean, we could talk for hours about why this is right now specifically something with manufacturing. And why it's so important. But look, if you're listening to this and this really sounds familiar to you, or you want to talk through this, with Adrian, this is a lot of what he spends his time doing, right? I mean, he spends his time getting on with business leaders and talking through how their cyber program, is maturing. And it's kind of one of those things. You're either growing or you're dying, sort of thing, right? And I mean, that's very true in this space as well. If you're not being intentional about the maturation of your cyber program, like you're dying, right? It's borderline negligence at some point. So, Adrian,
Scaling's a lot harder when you don't build the framework underneath you to build, right? And that's kind of what this is.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for joining, Adrian. That's a wrap.